appreciate all of you who are joining me for this, either live or perhaps later on the recording. Delighted that you're taking the time. This is about the resource called Leadership in Behavior Support. And by way of getting started, I wanted to find out just a little bit about the range of job roles of the people who are with me live. And so we're going to have a poll up there that Jackie will host. You'll see it over in the right-hand side of your screen in all probability. And if you'd indicate your current job role, building principal, assistant principal, or somebody who may be heading towards becoming a principal, central office role, either central office administrator or supervisor, service center folks probably mark the central office because you're supporting building-based administrators, and others, school psychologists, teachers, et cetera. Go ahead and hit the other for us. And while you're taking the time to fill that out, and we'll give it just about a minute, and then Jackie will show us the results, let me just tell you a little bit about my background. I've actually never been a building principal, but this is the start of my 46th year in education. I actually started as a teacher's aide 46 years ago, and did that for 2 years while I finished my undergraduate degree, became a teacher, and then had the privilege of moving into being a teacher coach for a number of years, which got me working with lots of different buildings in different areas around the country and seeing how vitally important the building-based administrator job role is, and did that for a number of years, and that moved me into staff development. And I've been doing staff development for quite a few decades now and still love it, and I'm not the least bit tired of it because it's so challenging and so gratifying as well to be assisting schools in their efforts to become better places for kids. So with that said, Jackie, do you want to go ahead and show us the results? So looking like 12% building principals, 10% assistants or people heading towards building-based leadership, 17% central office, and 33% others. So we've got a range of job roles, and some people that didn't have a chance to respond to the poll, no big deal. But I'll try to make this relevant, hopefully, for all of your job roles. But the focus really is on that leadership issue at the building-based level. And so those of you who are central office or other, I hope that you'll be thinking about just how you can support those processes. Okay, so with that said, let me share with you what I hope to do in this very brief amount of time. I do want to introduce you to the book, Leadership in Behavior Support. I'll get to that in just a minute, so that'll be sort of the commercial message of this. And I want to move very quickly, though, into some of the content of the book, the first part of which is a focus on why guiding behavior is one of the most essential roles for building-based leaders. And by guiding behavior, I mean all aspects of behavior support: safety, climate, student connectedness, motivation, behavior problems, barriers to learning, et cetera. I want to move from there into specific ideas that you can immediately incorporate into your building, whether you're the building-based leader or not. Just a few examples of which, just to give you a sense of where I'm going, is I want to introduce the concept of the importance of archiving your school-wide behavior plan. Introduce those of you who are not familiar with my work to improving behavior by looking at the STOIC acronym: structure, teach, observe, interact positively, and correct fluently. But I'll be very brief on that, so those of you who know my work quite a bit, this will be very brief on that, which is clearly going to be a repeat for you. I definitely want to provide some ideas on improving staff unity and also some ideas on encouraging some of the more reluctant or skeptical staff to get on board with being part of that staff unity. And so the way I've decided to frame this is to look at portions of the book, show you a bit of the breadth of what's there, but immediately go into a few specifics. So whether you have the book or not, this isn't just a big infomercial for the book itself. Okay, so with that said, the book itself is Leadership in Behavior Support. I'm the lead author, and a number of colleagues who over the years have become dear, dear friends, many of whom have been building-based principals at various points in their career, school counselors, supervisors, and so on, and people that I've had the wonderful honor of learning from. The book itself is actually 13 chapters, 540 pages. There's a number of downloads, forms, and tools, some of which I've provided in this webinar that especially for you building-based administrators, whether you have the book or not, there's going to be some forms in this webinar that I hope you would find compelling enough that you might want to spend a few minutes after the webinar at some point in the near future that you would find these forms to be useful. Another part of what is in the book is downloads of game plans for dealing with chronic referrals, and to be able to keep the cost of the book manageable and the size of the book manageable. This is actually 347 pages of reference material for dealing with some of those kinds of problems, 50 different problems that you frequently see in your office, just to name a few: aggression, cheating, cliques, fighting, non-compliance, victimization, 50 different problems that you can look up and go, well, here could be a game plan, both for responding to the kid in my office in the near term, but even more importantly, how might I guide the staff in setting up a longitudinal prevention plan? There's also a download of a template for a school-wide behavior plan, this concept of an archive, and then a download of a sample archive, which just shows you what one school might look like with this archive. And let me, in terms of practical content, just start there. Some of you who are actively working on behavior support currently, one of the things that's real important is that you archive that work in some fashion. We're advocating calling it your school-wide behavior plan, so that that archive of policies and procedures and rituals and traditions and lessons for students and job descriptions or whatever for staff all be in a place so that you, in essence, are constructing a plan for the culture and climate that you're trying to create in your school, in hopes that over time, as there is turnover of personnel, that we do not lose any effective practices just because people move away. I've had the privilege of working on school-wide, what is now being referred to as school-wide positive behavior support, since really the mid-'80s, and a bunch of that work in the mid and late '80s was done through service centers or educational service districts, where we had schools from different districts, so it wasn't a district-level support. Some schools that made truly magnificent changes in improving the climate and safety of the school. And then, unfortunately, when the principal moved away, or the principal and a couple of key staff members moved away, it all disappeared within a year or two. That's a shame. So the first practical thing here, and I'll wrap around and be brief on this at the end, is the whole idea of constructing a written school-wide behavior plan so that you have created that archive of the cultural practices in your school. Okay, now, bear with me for talking about why it is important to bother with a focus on behavior support, and support meaning safety, climate, discipline, behavior, motivation, etc. In essence, it is to decrease the barriers to learning in order to improve academic outcome, while concurrently increasing school connectedness or student engagement with the school, student connection to the school. And there's been so much data in recent years that if we can create emotional connectedness for our kids in the school, all of the kids in the school, it improves all kinds of life outcomes. It improves in the near term school attendance, in the long term students' physical and mental health. They even wear seat belts more frequently if they are currently or have been connected with their school. It increases graduation rates and so many other positive outcomes that it's absolutely vital that we focus on this. And in order for that to happen, it does require skillful leadership from building-based administrators. This next couple of slides come actually from a grant application that some colleagues at the University of Missouri have submitted because they're hoping to get a large grant to do research basically on this vehicle, leadership and behavior support, as a vehicle for training administrators. And here are some of the findings that they shared in that grant application. Grissom and Loeb examined a range of principal skills that included all aspects of the principal's daily work, yet only organizational management skills, of which school safety was the most important dimension, significantly correlated with student achievement growth. Looking at another rationale for how this work on safety and behavior connects to that vital, important variable of student achievement. This is research that's been done within the city of Chicago, huge database. Research within the Chicago data suggests that of all mediating processes, only the school learning climate is significantly associated with classroom instruction and student achievement. Continuing on with this, now going international, the PISA studies, which you've all heard about. It's basically the studies that compare different countries and their current educational results, and they always get significant press when they come out. I think the most recent was 2012, and in 2012 in reading, comparing over 60 different countries, the U.S. came out 24th in reading and 36th in math. So the PISA studies, always what gets press is that in the U.S., where we tend to want to be number one with everything, we're kind of middle of the road in reading, and we're kind of toward the bottom half when it comes to math, which is a little bit shocking. But they've also analyzed within those studies what are the features that seems to make a difference. This is the quote. Results from the PISA studies, which compared student performance and school contexts across multiple international contexts, found that among approximately 50 factors related to the learning environment that they studied, only school disciplinary climate was consistently and positively associated with student achievement in most of those countries. 48 out of 61 found that this was the major factor. The only other variables that had consistent relationships with student achievement across countries were measures of absences and tardiness, which of course are subsets of school discipline and climate. So all of that is just by way of saying that this work on the broad topic of what is being called positive behavior support is not only vital, it has direct evidence that from the school leader's perspective, it is a vital area of focus for leadership to concentrate on because it is the most documented evidence of making a difference in student achievement. Okay, so with that said, let me go to another poll. If you would please go ahead and respond to this once Jackie gets it pulled up. I'd like to know a little bit about your current approach to school-wide behavior support. And again, thinking broadly, behavior support meaning climate, safety, discipline, motivation. So if you're currently implementing safe and civil schools within your school or your district, which is Foundations, my school-wide approach, and or CHAMPS discipline in the secondary classroom, which is my classroom management approach. If you're implementing either or both of those on a school-wide basis, go ahead and click A. If you're implementing PBIS, Dr. Sugai and Horner's model, also being implemented, of course, by many, many other people, Don Kincaid, Lucille Eber, Terry Scott, Tim Lewis, et cetera, would all be implementing PBIS along the Technical Assistance Center model. If you're implementing behavior support but not following a particular model, click C for me. And if you're not currently focused on behavior support, it's just not been a targeted area within your district or building, then click D. And as you're completing that, and as we try to give other people a chance to get more involved, let me describe just a little bit more. If you're in a service center, and there might be a variety of focus, just what are most of your schools implementing? And part of the reason that I want to share this, or that I would like information on this rather, is it's going to help me focus. I've got this webinar prepared, but there are some parts that I may choose to skip over depending upon how this data comes out, because if you're implementing, if most are already implementing safe and civil schools, I'll be very, very brief on anything like STOIC that summarize what that is, whereas if most people are less familiar, then I may spend a few more minutes on that. So, Jackie, is it looking like we've had a fair number of responses? And if so, go ahead and show us the results whenever you're able. Jackie, results? Thank you very much. So 37% implementing safe and civil, 31% PBIS, number of people that didn't have an opportunity to respond. So fairly even mix. That's great. And my hope is that that both the things that I share with you in terms of practical ideas, even if you're not implementing safe and civil schools, that'll give you some ideas here within our next 40 minutes or so that you can implement even within a PBIS framework. Likewise, I would hope that it might be of interest to those of you who are predominantly implementing PBIS to take a look at this leadership book as a vehicle for furthering and deepening your efforts. And certainly philosophically, PBIS and safe and civil schools are completely aligned with each other. They're just some different tools and some different frameworks for evaluating efficacy, but they are very, very similar in their philosophical approach. Okay, with that said, that's very helpful. Thank you for that information. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the table of contents for various chapters so that what you see here is the introduction and then chapter 1, which is develop the foundation for a proactive and positive learning climate. But then for each of these chapters, I've selected a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. So for each chapter, or most of the chapters, or as many as we have time for, I want to share with you some critical features, like, for example, from within Chapter 1, Distributed or Shared Leadership. I'm going to read, and this will be the only one that I'll read from, by the way. None of the other chapters will I do this. But within Chapter 1, we used with permission some information from John Hattie's High Impact Leadership, which many of you have seen and have worked with. Here's a quote from Hattie. "The high impact leader creates a school climate in which everybody learns, learning is shared, and critique isn't just tolerated but welcomed." He then goes, so that basically is saying that distributed leadership is important. It cannot just be autocratic. Now, within that chapter, we actually gives a range of examples of things where the administrator may need to not do distributed decision-making. It's just, this is a safety issue. This is what we need to do, as compared to things that may be more shared decision-making. But whether it is shared decision-making or whether it is a unilateral unilateral board policy or building principal decision. This is what we're going to do. A key variable is getting everybody involved. A theme that I'll use throughout this time, and I'll just want to introduce it to you now because it'll be a shorthand later, is that you would be better off with no dress code at all than a dress code that is enforced by only 7 out of 10 of staff. And it doesn't even matter how that dress code was originally developed. Whatever the dress code is now, we have to inspire everybody to be on board, or students get very, very bad information from us. So that concept of shared leadership is, part of shared leadership is getting everybody to realize that the only way to communicate what the school's dress code is, and dress code being metaphoric or representative of scores of rituals, procedures, and traditions that have to be part of our school climate and our school culture, that we have to have people, everybody recognizing them from students' perspective. All of us have to be the leaders. And then there's another section that we pulled from Hattie and some other researchers that is the difference between transformational leaders and instructional leaders. Now, I'm going to read you very briefly a definition of transformational leaders from Hattie. Transformational leaders, focus primarily on teachers. They set a vision, create common goals for the school, inspire and set direction, buffer staff from external demands, ensure fair and equitable staffing, and give teachers a high degree of autonomy. Now, a researcher named Marks estimates that more than 80% of school leaders surveyed claim to be transformational leaders. The problem with that is, in Hattie's work, that has very, very small effect sizes. On the other hand, instructional leaders, Hattie defines as this: they focus primarily on students. They're concerned with teachers and the school's impact on student learning and instructional issues, conducting classroom observations, ensuring professional development that enhances student learning, communicating high academic standards, and ensuring that all school environments are conducive to learning. And the effect sizes on instructional leaders who focus on things like leaders who get everyone in the school working together to know and evaluate their impact had effect sizes of 0.84. Now, without going into a big thing on effect sizes, a 0.11 is a very, very low, it sort of makes a difference, but it's marginal, whereas a 0.84 is a very high-powered impact. And so we just define, and within this chapter, and ask administrators to explore, which one are you? And a shorthand for that is, I very, very early on in working on school-wide discipline, had a chance to work with all of the schools in a district in California. This would have been clear back probably about 1985. And 2 schools in particular just really ran with this, one elementary and one middle school. And it really was a meaningful and within a year, a hugely visible difference. Lower suspensions, lower office discipline referrals, improved staff satisfaction, just generally more positive climate. And in exploring with these 2 particular administrators who were very grateful, this gave us a framework to make just such massive progress, the 3 of us were just at dinner one night and just trying to explore why it worked so effectively in their buildings, and in other buildings it helped, but it did not make the massive immediate difference that it did in theirs. And both of them, just in casual dialogue about this over dinner, said that they felt that a difference that characterized them as compared to some of their principal colleagues was, they said, some principals are in it for the staff, and that means largely smoothing things over and making things pleasant and effective and comfortable for staff. And they both said, our first criteria is always what's best for students, and that means sometimes there's some tough, difficult discussions and decisions and even unilateral decisions that we, the principal, have to make that initially staff it may not make all staff members happy. And so that notion of an instructional leader, the most important priority is always going to be, what is the impact that this has on students? And like in all of the work within Safe and Civil School, schools, we try to turn that from sort of an overarching view or philosophy to what does this look like in practice. And we try to have lots of examples of things that would be examples of instructional leaders as compared to transformational leaders. Okay, Chapter 2 is looking at just trying to make sure that you as building-based leaders, or you as district or service center people who are supporting those leaders, can understand and improve the climate and culture with evidence-based strategies, and that this is not a philosophy. There, in fact, is an evidence base for this. And in focusing on what to try to highlight from this chapter, for those of you who are not familiar with Safe and Civil Schools, we address most behavioral change, and you'll see the boxed item there, change student and staff behavior with the STOIC variables. And basically STOIC is an acronym for the 5 variables that you can manipulate in order to have a positive impact on students, and if we're trying to help guide staff as well, what can we do to help them? And the first of those is structure the environment for success, teach expectations to both students and staff with clarity and inspiration. A quick example of that would be, if you're an elementary principal, do you have a job description for playground supervisors? Because if you don't, we would encourage that you need one, and we supply some samples within the book, but you need one because those playground supervisors need to overtly know your expectations. Specifically, again, narrowing down, there's lots of other variables, but specifically, have you divided your playground into zones based on the number of supervisors that you have? And have you made very, very clear that supervisors must stay in their zones? Because an example, if we don't teach that, is if you have 3 playground supervisors out there, elementary people are understandably so starved to be able to talk during the day to somebody over the age of 9 years old that they tend to congregate together and talk to each other. But if you lay out a job description, and part of that job description is zones, and you let them know safety of our students is vital, we need you to circulate throughout your zone and only in your zone, that's clarity of expectation. Then the O, the I, and the C are in fact directly how are we as adults doing with supervising? Are we observing and monitoring? Are we interacting positively while we're observing and monitoring? And are we correcting misbehavior fluently, calmly, consistently, immediately, respectfully? So within this chapter, it just introduces that framework that becomes an important factor as time goes on and as we go deeper into other aspects of the book. Also, just a reminder before I go too much further, if at any point here you have a question, remember to find the chat box, and I will try to keep an eye on questions as we go and answer them as we go, but I'll also try to leave some time at the end for any that I have not gotten to. And if there are questions even at the end that I do not get to, we'll be happy to put together a written response to those and send them directly to all of the participants. Okay, continuing on with a view of what's in the book, but also some specifics. Chapter 3 is about the importance of building positive relationships, and you certainly know how critical it is that we want staff to build relationship with students, but in Chapter 3, this being geared to the administrator, this is about the critical nature of you building relationships with not just between staff and students, but between yourself and staff, yourself and students, and yourself and families. And there's a couple of things that I wanted to show you here, and one of the first is just the concept of building trusting relationships. Building trusting relationships, which is one of the first items, really is a critical variable that's correlated with administrator effectiveness. And within the book, and feel free to utilize this even just from the webinar, whether you have the book or not, but this is just, we encourage self-reflection. And this one is, we've looked at the literature and identified that these are critical traits that may make a difference in terms of building trust with staff, students, and families. And for you as a leader, it encourages that you take the time, not just to go, oh, I do that, I do that, I do that. You probably do all of these things, but some of them you do more consciously and perhaps better than others. And so it encourages that you rank order these. What's the one that you know for an absolute fact, oh, I have just always been great at, for example, being genuine and honest? Where would you put, though, providing positive feedback? And given that I mentioned I would talk about reluctant staff, which I will do in more detail as we get to some of the other chapters, are you good at, you've all heard the phrase, catch them being good. Well, with your reluctant staff, how are you doing with catching them being good? Are you looking for those opportunities? Even though this person may have work that you're hoping that they will be doing to grow and to become a more positive part of the staff, what are you doing to identify times that you can give positive, specific feedback? And within the book itself, each of these, we have a page or two of descriptions of how you can evaluate your own performance with this. And like on that one on providing positive feedback, it provides very specific data about the importance of how to give positive feedback, one part of which, of course, is being specific and descriptive. Okay, continuing on. Still with Chapter 3, another factor that we introduce is the importance of meeting basic human needs. And this is needs of students and needs of staff. This is some wonderful work that three of the co-authors, B.J. Weiss, Kim Markham, and Mike Haken, brought to my work many, many decades ago when they were implementing my approach to school-wide discipline, and I got to learn, know, and love what wonderful school leaders they were. They introduced me to this concept of everybody has basic human needs. And you'll see if you look at the shaded bar here, on this visual, I just put an arrow there, staff member, which is the vertical column, but the basic human needs, a need for recognition, hey, you're doing a fine job of, acknowledgement, good morning, Mrs. Thompson, it's wonderful to see you today, just attention, do you give enough attention to meet the needs? And thinking about kids and thinking about staff, different adults have different needs for a level of attention, and if we're not meeting those needs in positive ways, then people will tend to demand our attention, potentially in negative ways. Belonging, a sense of I am connected to this environment. I am a vital part of this environment. Competence, nurturing, purpose, and stimulation and variety. And again, just as a tool to consider and to think about whether this would be a useful exercise to perhaps do with all of your staff, which, by the way, you can do this in about a minute or two for each staff member. I would encourage you to think about one of your staff members who is just one of those wonderful step up for everything, leadership, loved by colleagues, loved by kids, loved by district, because they are part of the leadership of your building, and whether they're labeled as a leader or not. It could be a teacher, it could be a school psychologist, it could be a paraprofessional, but one of those people who is just top of the line when it comes to your building and being connected to your building. Think about one of your staff members who's perhaps just a bit more neutral, and then think about one of your staff members who is, in fact, most reluctant or most negative or most skeptical, and take the time to reflect on your relationship with each of those and the relationship of that person to their connection to your building. Does that person get recognition? Well, if you think about that first person, in all probability, they're getting lots of recognition and accolades. They get letters from parents. They get letters from their kids talking to them about what wonderful teachers they are and so on. Likewise, acknowledgement. They have so many colleagues who know and respect them. They have so many kids who know and respect them that as they walk down the hall, they're high fives, there's greetings, etc. So acknowledgement and attention is met in very positive ways. And then do the same thing for those other two staff members, the one who is kind of in the middle in terms of connection to your school, and then the one who is most reluctant or skeptical. And then set up a plan. If you notice some deficits that, I don't know if this person, Mr. Smith, I don't know if he has a real sense of belonging in this school. And if he doesn't, what could I as the leader do to increase his sense of belonging? Because that may increase his sense of wanting to be motivated within this building. So again, just a tool for you to consider and utilize from this webinar if you feel it is worthwhile. Still from Chapter 3, and I'll be more brief on the other chapters. This is the only one that I've decided to pull 3 things from. But it's an introduction to positive interactions, and you'll see that it is one of the factors down a little bit ways down within Chapter 3. But positive interactions, of course, is very big within Safe and Civil Schools. It's very big within PBIS. We in Safe and Civil say that adults' interactions with kids should be at least 3 times more frequently interacting with kids who are engaged in positive behavior. Hey, you're doing a fine job of staying on task. Good morning, Marco. It is very nice to see you today. For every corrective that we have to give. I think PBIS says it should be 4 to 1. Various other people, Bill Jensen, Tough Kid Material, who I know and love his work. Bill, I believe, says it should be 5 to 1. But that concept, which almost all of you are familiar with because you're familiar with behavior support, whether it's my framework or Sugai and Horner's, the concept that we want to bring up here with the leadership book is this is also vitally critical with your staff. What are your relationships like with your staff? And if you think about your reluctant or your perhaps more negative influences on the staff, are you working on your relationships? And your ratio of interactions being a major factor within those relationships. So again, what we try to do within the book is take these broad concepts like we know we have reluctant staff members who are not quite as much of a positive force in our building as perhaps other staff are. So what can we do? What actions can we take? And a huge part of that is, in fact, ratios of interactions. Okay, going on here, Chapter 4 are specific ideas on conducting powerful staff meetings and practicing effective decision-making. And with Chapter 4, what I'd like to focus on with you is specifying a process for each item on your staff meeting agendas. For every item, we would encourage that your staff meeting agendas be identified as, is this information dissemination? Is it staff discussion with the idea, I want your input, but this decision is going to be made by me, the principal, or we want your input, but this decision is going to be made by the Foundation's Positive Behavior Support Team? Or is it brainstorming? Hey, we, the Positive Behavior Support Team, we're thinking about working on morning arrival. We want to take a 5-minute agenda in a staff meeting to brainstorm problems or concerns about morning arrival, and then we're going to do a 5-minute brainstorming about any ideas about what could be done to make morning arrival more orderly, safe, fun, gentle, and respectful. 5 minutes on problem, 5 minutes on possible solutions, and then we're meeting about this next Tuesday. Any of you who want to join our meeting can do so, but we won't take any more than 10 minutes of the total staff's time. Or is it decision making? 2 weeks ago, we did some brainstorming about morning arrival. We, the leadership team, have done some work on this. We are going to present our proposal, and if at the end of an 8-minute overview, it seems like there's a fair amount of staff agreement that this looks good, we will do a vote by consensus. And then, so back to just the agenda items. For each item that it does involve decision-making, so whether it's a staff decision by a team or whether it's decision-making that's going to be made by the administrator, clarify, is this FYI only? We, the leadership team, have decided X or Y, or is it an administrative decision but with staff input? Here is the decision. I listened to your input, and this, based upon that input, here's what I've decided. Or is it a staff decision? And Chapter 5 is a huge amount about staff decision. Another tool that you can take a look at is just an effective decision-making form, so it can kind of walk you through some of those kinds of things for you to rate your own skill level and develop your own internal self-improvement process. So back to the outline material, Chapter 5, establish and work with a behavior leadership team. And this behavior leadership team, here's a place that we would be very analogous to PBIS, but I do think in some ways we may flesh it out just a little bit. We provide very detailed information on forming that behavior leadership team. Those of you who work with behavior leadership teams, whether you're the building-based leader, whether you're a member of that team, or whether you're part of a district or service center where you're supporting different buildings and their teams, it's very important that your team be highly respected staff members. These are the people that when the old J.F. Hutton commercial, when they talk, everybody listens. That's what we want, although you also want a diversity of views, meaning it is a good idea if you have some highly respected staff members but who are viewed as more skeptical. They're the ones who question, is this worth doing or isn't it? Having some of those people on your team is a really good idea. And the other specific about this that I want to share with you is formal representation of every staff member. Now, if you've got a team, you don't even have to reform the team to do this, but you should sit down with that team and go, we don't have a maintenance person on the team. Who on this team wants to represent maintenance? Great. It is now your job, Suzanne, to make sure that anything that has an impact on maintenance, that you communicate with them before we make a decision. You invite them to any meetings that we have, and anything discussed in staff meetings, whether it relates to behavior or not, if it's information for maintenance, it becomes your job to share that information with them. Somebody needs to represent clerical. We have a school psychologist only 2 days a week in this building, but who is going to represent the school psychologist? Who represents the classroom teachers, special ed, who represents the other administrative team, et cetera. And that formal representation should be redone annually and should be publicized annually. Okay, again, just pulling specifics from each chapter. Chapter 6 is about using a continuous cycle of activities to drive improvement, that being review, prioritize, revise, adopt, implement. I'm going to show you a visual of that in just a minute. And that cycle needs to be driven by data. So let me go on and show you a visual of what I mean by those two chapters. Here you see a cycle of ongoing improvement, reviewing meaningful data, and not just office discipline referrals. Discipline referrals is powerful. Discipline referrals are useful, but we also have surveys of staff, students, and families. We also encourage observations of the common areas of all of your schools, and that, whether you're doing our work or not, just about 4 weeks into school, so for some of you, you're heading towards this time right now, somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks into school having started, take your leadership team and divide them up. 2 or 3 people observe morning arrival, 2 or 3 people observe passing times in the major hallways between first and second period, 2 or 3 people are going to observe cafeteria, courtyard, et cetera, during lunch. 2 or 3 people are going to observe passing times between 5th and 6th, and 2 or 3 people are going to observe dismissal. You're going to compare the survey, observations, discipline referral, at least annual analysis of injury reports, and then occasionally, if we have data that puzzles us, why do we have so many kids that wander around at lunch not talking to anybody? Let's get a focus group, a few of the kids, and just talk to them. What do you do during lunch? What are ranges of things that you might like to do during lunch? A focus group could help you with that problem. But you use multiple data sources to identify 1, 2, or 3 priorities for improvement, which, when we're prioritizing, once we have prioritized something for improvement, you use the STOIC variables to revise policy, procedures, rituals, which, if it's a shared decision-making, once it's adopted by staff, then we implement. And I'm going to add just one thing here to this slide. It's a quote from John Foster Dulles, former Secretary of State. The measure of success is not whether you have a tough problem to deal with, but whether it's the same problem you had last year. Those of you who are doing either PBIS or foundations, reflect on last year, and you should be able to say, oh, last year the 2 major priorities that we tackled were improving lunchtime and everything that happens connected with lunchtime outside in the courtyard, et cetera, in our high school, And we were trying to improve average daily attendance. And if you can point to, oh, yes, our average daily attendance is better, our number of chronic absentee kids is fewer, and we have a lot of data that says we have not had any fights occurring since we implemented the new lunchtime processes, then you can go, we still have tough problems to deal with in this school, but absenteeism and lunchtime are not as big a problem, so we can go on and work on other priorities. Okay, I'm going to be very brief about some of the next things. Chapter 8 is looking at your common areas and common policies, and this uses STOIC, and I'm just going to run through very quickly a few ideas that reflect STOIC, which means structure and teach, which if you know ABC, those are the antecedents to behavior. Behavior is we the adults are observing student behavior, and while we're observing, we should be creating positive reinforcing consequences by interacting positively, and we should be correcting misbehavior to reduce the future occurrence of misbehavior that we observe. So with that said, here's just some examples of structure. If noise in an elementary cafeteria is a problem, if you put kids on only one side of the cafeteria tables, it makes a huge difference. This is a middle school example of the same thing from Langston Hughes Elementary in Chicago City Schools. This is actually Wilson Elementary in Fresno, California. This example comes from A&M Consolidated. If your high school has friction amongst your staff on using electronic devices, this is one of many, many things that we have in this chapter. A&M Consolidated came up with this large poster, which is a laminated poster in every classroom, and it has a movable clip. That movable clip where for teachers where it's variable, every day it might be something different, they move the clip. For teachers who never use electronic devices, they say on the first day, please notice where the clip is about electronic devices. They're not going to be used in class today nor any day for the rest of the year here in fourth period. If I see a device out, it is my job to confiscate it. You put it in this plastic bag, I turn it into the office, you can pick it up at the end of the day, unless it is the third time it's happened, in which case your parents have to pick it up. So it becomes part of school-wide policy, and it takes what before seemed like an inconsistency amongst the staff, and by public posting, made it positive. This is an example of public posting. This is from Hastings Ninth Grade Center in Alief, California. This whole thing that you see here, not just the notebook, but the whole poster with the notebook as part of it. Hastings Ninth Grade Center way equals success. Am I dressed for success? This is posted outside every door as teachers are greeting kids at the door. They ask kids to do a self-check, or they say, Ryan, hold up, you need to do a self-check. It does not appear to me that your pants are at your waist. Fix it up, young man, before you enter my room. This posting was a structural element that emphasized the teaching, but the posting made it easier to be consistent. This one, forgive the smallness of this. This is a posting in the restroom of a school in Cedar Rapids, Iowa from years ago. Best task analysis of bathroom behavior I've ever seen. Go flush, wash, leave. I shared that in some work in Alabama this summer. They shared this picture with me. This is high school restroom in Alabama. The next slide, I'm going to show you a blown-up picture of this. And just FYI, this is a rural Alabama school. The custodian, by the way, who came up with this, reported it made a big difference in the school. So these are just examples of things, types of things that you can do to try to have a positive impact on your common areas and your common policies. Just saw a question here I'm going to take up. When you say the team should be redone annually, how long do you think members should hold a team, hold a term? How often should members be rotated? Great question, Mark. Thank you for that. Annually, what you want to make sure you do is that you repost who represents whom. And then in terms of the idea of length of term, I have no data to support this, so please, if you're different than this, don't feel like you're doing something wrong. But in general, I think a 3-year term so that about a third of our team rotates off. If we have a team of, let's say, 8 people, 2 to 3 new people each year, and let's say you're a middle school and you have somebody who represents the 6th grade team, 7th grade team, 8th grade team, and the 6th grade team member has been on it 2 years, years. She's about to have a baby, so next year she doesn't choose to be on the team because she's going to have important family considerations. If she rotates off, then you say to the 6th grade team, and Mrs. Thompson also represents the custodial staff and the school psychologist, you say to the 6th grade team, maintenance staff, and psychologist, you folks get together and decide who is going to represent you next year. That about a third rotation each year is probably a way to maintain momentum, but also keep a fresh perspective on things. Chapter 9 is about responding and effectively and consistently to misbehavior. The main thing that I want to share here is that we're trying to reduce this problem. And then I called my teacher a blankety blank blank. How about you? And while they're waiting to talk to the principal, his colleague says, oh, I forgot my homework. Those are very, very different behaviors. One, it is reasonable to send to the office. One, it is not. And yet most administrators in most buildings know every day you get this variety. And so one of the things that we try to do in Chapter 9 is guide you through establishing a 3-level system. This is very, very much included within foundations if you're already doing my foundations. But as importantly, it involves menus, creating menus of appropriate corrections for misbehaviors that you observe, most of which should not involve office referral. And then a whole section on preventing the misbehaviors that lead to referrals. Have we taught kids how to interact with adults? And we have sample lesson plans on how to accept reprimands and how to accept corrections and so on. Continuing on, Chapter 10 is this idea of game plan, and this is the supplementary material. You'll see it's relatively few pages in the book, but the free download as part of the book is you have 347 pages that takes, I've actually got 2 slides of these problems, that these are ranges of problems that you can look up specifically and go, what do I do in the near term? How do I talk to the family about this problem that the child exhibited? But even more importantly, how do I set up a long-term prevention and intervention plan? So these are just ranges of the types of behavior. And with just a few minutes yet to go, please, if there are any other questions, send them my way. Oh, this is just an example of the cover page of what you can download. Each problem has 5 to 8 pages of suggested outcomes. This one happens to be victimization, chronic, the student who seems to repeatedly be the target of bullying, teasing, and harassment. Chapter 11 is special challenges, handling disagreements, dealing with difficult situations, engaging staff members who are reluctant to buy into the SBP, bullying, attendance. And let me focus for just a moment on attendance. Reluctant staff. One of the other quotes that we use, and just a theme to guide you in thinking about your reluctant staff, is treat people as if they were what they ought to be, and you help them become what they're capable of being, from the German poet, philosopher Goethe. I love this quote. I love sharing this quote about students. You have to have high expectations, and you have to provide students high support to grow and meet your expectations, but you always treat them as if they're the most responsible. And a line that I learned, again, from B.J. Weiss, Kim Markham, and Mike Haken, is whenever you see kids in your office, you should treat them as if you are surprised to see them. You should do the same thing with your staff. If a staff member makes an error and it's one of your staff members who frequently has problems, maybe blowing up at kids or saying some inappropriate, unkind things about kids to the child's parents, you could sit down with them and basically you address the problem, but you say, I'm actually surprised that someone who is so as respectful as you are would have made this statement. We need to talk about this statement because we need to go back to what we know you're capable of, which is high levels of being respectful of everybody that you interact with. Going on to attendance. This little section on attendance is also included within the Foundation's material and in some other material that we've published on attendance. But if you've not focused on attendance, do you know how many students were chronically absent last year at each grade level? If you're in middle school, do you know of your 6th grade kids? Do you know which ones of them had chronic absenteeism last year? Because every one of those kids who was chronically absent last year, you should have a little bit closer eyes, and don't misunderstand this next statement. I'm not saying that that child needs Tier 2 supports, but you should be viewing that child through Tier 2 kinds of eyes, meaning if that kid misses 2 days in the first 20, chronic absence is 10% of school days or more. That will soon emerge, I'm sure, as a federal definition. Right now, just most of us who focus on absenteeism. More than 10% of school days or more is a tipping point for all kinds of risk factors. And are you prepared to identify all of the kids in your school who are chronically absent, and are you prepared to do that as early as day 20 or at the latest by day 30? 30 days into the school year, have your clerical people or attendance clerks, whatever you have access to, print out a list. How many kids, we've had 30 days of school, how many kids missed 3 days or more? Because those kids need some additional help, and then it talks about policies that will assist kids with that. There's also a tool here which you could utilize if you wish to, whether you have the book or not. Just keep the attribution that it came from Safe and Civil Schools. This is a little thing that we encourage you share with families, which is, and with kids, how sick is too sick for school, and it's a decision tree. You're not feeling good today, mommy can work through with the kid. Okay, do you have a fever of 100 degrees or higher? Has your child vomited 2 or more times in a 24-hour period? And so on. So again, just trying to turn all of this work into very specific tools. And I'm heading towards wrapping up. I have 2 more chapters and then just a couple of concluding slides. Unify staff around a school-wide classroom management model. One of the large districts that we've had the honor and privilege of working with for probably about 18 years now. And I'm just taking a look at the roles here. Yeah, Carolyn Novelli is actually with us. Hi, Carolyn. Duval County Schools. When we first started doing work in this large district and they started focusing specifically on CHAMPS as a model, we were hearing from first-year teachers that the year before they had been exposed to up to 7 different models. The principal says you ought to implement Harry Wong. The counselor says you ought to implement Randy Sprick stuff. Their mentor across the hall says you ought to work with cooperative discipline. Adopting a school-wide model has tremendous benefits. Now, I'm self-serving in this because I've got one. CHAMPS is my elementary or middle school classroom management approach. Discipline in the secondary is basically CHAMPS for secondary, predominantly high school, but a lot of middle schools use this book too, which then allows you to set up frameworks where everybody's talking about a common language. And Chapter 12 is just about how to adopt a model and how to create a common language for administrative support and for non-evaluative coaching. And then the last chapter, sustain your improvement efforts and positive culture and climate across time. And it has a variety of things in there. Document and archive your work, which is that school-wide behavior plan. Energize staff and provide staff development opportunities. And you have to keep pumping staff up. You as a building-based leader are like the coach, and you have to keep pumping up that team for the important work that we do and how critical it is that we be in it together. I wish this quote were mine, but it's not. It comes from motivational speaker Zig Ziglar. He says, some people complain that motivation doesn't last. Well, neither does bathing. That is why both are recommended on a daily basis. And as the building-based leader, it's you pumping up the staff for unification and for being positive. We just have to keep doing it over and over. And then the last bit of content is use incentives to increase staff buy-in to the team-based behavior behavior support processes. And we actually, within the book, have a menu of ways of doing that. And the only one that I want to share with you on this one, just because of time limitations, is we did ask the staff of a high school that is within a very, very large urban district, in this case not Duval County, this is a school district on the West Coast. We asked the staff, what kind of incentives, when the team sees you doing a good job with stuff, what would be some type of incentives that you would want? The number one response that people replied with was a handwritten note from the principal. And we were actually surprised. Here we've got this urban setting, highly sophisticated staff of working with urban youth, and what they wanted was a note from the principal. So just lots of examples of ranges of things that you, the administrator, can do. Now, I'll end with my last minute or two with just a reminder about this concept of the school-wide behavior plan. Within the book itself, we do have a template for this that is fillable. All of these forms, by the way, once you download them, you have them on your computer, and you can then type directly on the forms and print them off or save them if you wish to. So there's a template for doing this, but there's also a 52-page sample. And what we did for this hypothetical Lincoln Middle School, because we wanted to hit the middle between elementary and high school and have examples that would hopefully work for both, is we have a 52-page sample of what is their mission statement, what are their guidelines for success, what are the STOIC guidelines that staff should know, and then down here, just skipping down, for common areas, what are our procedures for playground, restroom, hallways, common areas, et cetera, so that you can see what we mean by an example of an archive that can actually be used to sustain practices that last beyond your tenure as the principal of a building. So possible uses for this material. It's a self-study tool for an individual. You can use these reflective exercises, these checklists, et cetera. It can be a book study for a small group of administrators. Could be a district-wide book study for all of the administrators to work through together over the course of a year. Or it could be a resource for training upcoming leaders, either a small group or any of you who are mentoring. And I hope that you might find any or all of those to be useful to you. And just end with a quote that I included in the middle as well, and it is just a reminder that with kids and with staff, treat people as if they were what they ought to be, and you help them become what they're capable of being. Thank you so much for joining me for this, and if you can give me any feedback, pro or con, yes or no, I would deeply appreciate it. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks, everyone, for taking the time to join us today, and thanks, Randy, for giving us a rundown on the new leadership book. If you found this information valuable, you'll be able to access the recording along with the PDF of the slides in a day or two's time on our archived webinar page on the Pacific Northwest Publishing site. And then just a note, we've also got a couple other webinars coming up, one covering one of our newest releases, Picture Perfect, the Video Self-Modeling for Behavior Change book, which will be on October 20th. And we'll follow that up with another look at the recently published First Step Next, Interventions for Young Students on November 30th. And you can get to that information on our website also. We really appreciate you all taking the time to join us. We're going to keep this open for just a minute or so to see if anybody has any additional questions. You can send them on, and then we can get them answered for you. Okay, I think that we are good to go, Randy. I don't see.
Great. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you.